All right, I think we'll get started as people are taking their seats. I think you all might know who I am, thanks to Barbara's lovely recognition last night. I'm Lynn Ransom, curator of programs at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies. And before we get started, as we entered the last stretch of our own personal Philadelphia marathon today, the end is in sight. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the mastermind. I want to make sure he's here. The mastermind behind this wonderful symposium. This is really Nick's show. Please, let's give him a round of applause. Excuse me. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker in this last session. There are few scholars who have contributed as much to the field of manuscript studies in the last 50 years or so as Professor Lucy Freeman Sandler, the Helen Gould Shepard Professor of Art History, Emerita at New York University, especially in regard to the study of Gothic manuscript illumination and codicology. Professor Sandler's long and distinguished career as one of the great interpreters of Gothic, excuse me, I tried to get this out for the book, I promise, of Gothic illumination has shaped generations of scholarship. From her first book published by Harvey Miller in 1974, the Peterborough Psalter in Brussels and other Finland manuscripts, to her most recent book published just last year by the British Library, Penned and Painted, The Art and Meaning of Books in Medieval and Renaissance Art. Manuscripts, thank you. I left out that word. That was a while ago. In between have appeared countless other books, articles, exhibitions, and catalogs, including her foundational contribution to the survey of manuscripts illuminated in the British Isles, Gothic manuscripts, 1285 to 1385, which masterfully illustrated the milestone achievements of English manuscript illumination and documented the complex networks and movements of otherwise mostly anonymous artists working in the period. Professor Sandler is truly one of the great giants of the field upon which so many people, including many of us here, stand. And her academic record is surpassed only by her legendary graciousness and generosity, again, which many of us here have likely benefited from in one way or another. So please give a warm welcome to Professor Sandler, who will be speaking to us today on manuscript images of the destruction and salvage of books.
Oh, Lynn, thank you very much. That was beyond words. And Nick and the whole Schoenberg Institute, this has been so illuminating to me, and I'm very happy to take part in this. I have to, first of all, I have to say that I do wish that I had known about Basira when I was writing the book that Lynn mentioned. It would have changed a great deal, but I'm looking forward to being able to use this wonderful, wonderful tool. I also have to say that in working on this, when I wrote the abstract for this paper, I was far more ambitious than I ended up being, and I ended up kind of spiraling inward and inward, so that you could call the title of my talk today, Images of Book Destruction in the Moralized Bible, because that is really what I'm going to focus on. Oh, okay. The first slide. I begin with a pair of images of modern book destruction that have become so ubiquitous that they've lost their gripping horror, though they serve us as a reminder that the long story of the destruction of books by fire hasn't ended. But in consideration of the theme of this conference, I'm going to look back today to pictorial images of book burning and other forms of book destruction in European illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages and the early modern era. When the liquidation of error, to borrow the title of Thomas Werner's monumental book, Den Irrtum liquidieren, when the liquidation of error was widely accepted both in authorized Christian theory and in practice. Writings deemed erroneous or heretical were a major focus of images of book destruction. The concept of heresy represented by such images was broad, including not only deviations from Orthodox Christianity, but also magic practices and non-Christian beliefs and customs, that is, those of pagans, Jews, and Muslims. Heretical beliefs didn't actually have to exist as written texts in order to be depicted in manuscripts as books. The ideas condemned as heretical were made visual in the form of book symbols, which could then be shown as burning up in flames or being destroyed in other ways. But if good guys destroyed bad books, even more often in manuscript imagery, bad guys destroyed good books, that is, the writings sacred to Jews and Christians from the Old Testament tables of the law to the New Testament Gospels. Here, too, the book images could be symbolic, standing for the entire body of Judeo-Christian religious beliefs and practices to which the concept of the book was so central. While hundreds, no, thousands of images of books appear in manuscripts, images of book destruction, though significant, are not common. For the most part, they began to appear only in the 13th century with the formal institution of the Inquisition. Illustrations appear sporadically in legal collections, in university texts, and in national and universal chronicles. A few devotional and liturgical books include a single image of heretical book destruction and miraculous book salvage from the life of Saint Dominic, as you see here. However, only in the various copies of the Moralized Bible of the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries do we find multiple representations of book destruction in the illustrations of a single text. And these are going to be the chief focus of this talk. As you know, the scriptural subjects of the Moralized Bible are correlated with both pictorial and textual expositions, or moralizations. What is of a particular interest is the evidence that these moralizations offer of the ways the biblical theme of book destruction was interpreted by the designers of the program and the potential users of the book. Now, the Vulgate text includes 4 episodes of book destruction in Exodus 32, Jeremiah 36, in 1 Maccabees 1, and in Acts 19. And I'm using the term book of book destruction here in the broadest sense to include tablets and rolls, as well as codices. Pictorial representations of one or more of the biblical episodes appear in all 7 of the chief interrelated copies of the Moralized Bible. And I think I have to identify them a bit here. The names of the commissioners or recipients that I'll be using are going to be those proposed in John Loudon's magnum opus, the making of the Bible Moralisée, published in 2000. Now here I have a list of the copies of the Moralized Bible, these 7 copies. First, there are 2 Moralized Bibles in Vienna, Codex 2554 of the early 1220s, possibly commissioned and owned by Blanche of Castile, wife of Louis VIII, with texts in French. And the other Vienna manuscript is Codex 1179 of the mid-1220s, possibly made for Louis VIII himself, with texts in Latin. And then we have the Bible of St. Louis in Toledo, ordered by Blanche for her son Louis IX and completed by 1234. Then the contemporary Bible, divided among the Bodleian in Oxford, the Bibliothèque Nationale, and the British Library, which we know for short as Oxford, Paris, London, possibly commissioned by Blanche for Louis IX's bride, Margaret of Provence. Oxford, Paris, London had several derivatives. Firstly, British Library, additional 18719, copied in England at the end of the 13th century. Second, its copy, the mid-14th century Bibliothèque Nationale Française 167, made for Jean Le Bon, King of France, and then altered for Charles V in the 1370s. And finally, the Bible begun in 1402 by the Lambourgs for Philip the Bold of Burgundy, continued for the Duke of Berry, but never completed. The 3 Old Testament passages about book destruction illustrated in the Moralized Bible, Exodus 32, Jeremiah 36, and 1 Maccabees 1, all concern the breaking, burning, or cutting up of books that are sacred, rather than those filled with error. To consider Exodus 32 first. In the Vulgate, the destruction is part of the long account of Moses receiving the tablets of the law, throwing them down and breaking them in anger because of the idolatry of the Israelites, and then receiving a new set again from the Lord. Illustrations of Moses destroying the tablets of the law are included in every copy of the Moralized Bible, and the texts of all the scriptural extracts and moralizations are similar. The most dramatic pair of images is in Vienna 1179. Here, the destroyed tablets in broken pieces have fragmentary inscriptions reading from the bottom, frangens, ta, then above buhl or bul, and moi and ses. The textual moralization is typological, explaining that Moses, who destroyed the tablets, stands for Christ, who destroyed the old law, and that just as God replaced Moses's broken tablets, so Christ replaced the old law with his new law. In a brilliant piece of pictorial wit, the designer of the moralization visualized the old law destroyed by Christ, and destroyed is the word used in the accompanying text. He visualized this as a sharply twisted scroll reading Hic synagoga a Dei filii frangitur. Here synagoga is broken by the Son of God. I'm reminded of how often the female personification of synagoga paired with ecclesia in contemporary art was shown with a broken spear or with a radically bent body, as in the Vienna Moralized Bible Manuscript 2554, which you see on the far right. The pictorial representation of the episode, of the Exodus episode, and its moralization changed with the Toledo and the Oxford, Paris, London Bibles, both somewhat later than Vienna 1179, and the new iconography remained stable thereafter. For one thing, Moses receiving the tablets of the law, which had been a separate image in the Vienna manuscripts, was now combined with their destruction. And more significantly, in the moralization, The personification of the old law, a synagogue, was replaced by the crucifixion of the new law. The updated textual exposition in Oxford, Paris, London explains that Jesus, quote, by his passion destroyed the old law and replaced it with the new. Quote. Now I show here on the right the pair of mid-14th century images in the Bible of Jean Le Bon, where the artist did not include the destruction of the first tablets at all, and just depicted God giving Moses the replacements. And in the moralization, the body of the crucified Christ, broken, bleeding, and emaciated, is adored, not just presented, and by a bishop rather than a mere cleric, a pictorial expression of heightened religious sentiment characteristic of 14th century art. Now to Jeremiah 36. The Vulgate account of Jeremiah's efforts to persuade Joachim, state king of Judah, to accept the prophecies received from God and repent of his sinful behavior. We can take as our starting point the Toledo Bible. The story begins with the illustration showing Joachim warming his hands over a fire on the central axis of the composition. The adjacent text is quoted from Jeremiah 36:22, and I'll read that. Now the king sat in the winter house in the 9th month, and there was a hearth before him full of burning coals. The subsidiary figures here represents Joachim's servants, not specified at this point in the Vulgate itself, and perhaps introduced by the designer as a kind of compositional parallel to the grouping in the moralization below. The text of the moralization is allegorical. Quote, winter is present-day life, the winter house, secular life, the hearth, the heart of the covetous, which fire cannot warm. This interpretation is similar to that in Hugh of St. Cher's commentary on Jeremiah, which began to circulate in Paris when the Moralized Bible was being composed. The visual moralization offers vivid examples of sin in secular society. For covetous behavior or cupidity, a wealthy layman with a money bag, his hand hovering over an alms box held by an admonishing cleric, and for greed or gluttony and lust, a couple sharing a cup of wine, their sinful behavior suggested by their knee-to-knee poses. The presence of the fire in the upper illustration on your left provides the visual link with the scriptural scene below, which is based on Jeremiah 36, verse 23. The text in Toledo reading, quote, and when he, that is Judy, Joachim's servant, had read the book, he, that is Joachim, cut it with a scribe's knife and threw it in the fire that was on the hearth. Again, the fire is central, and the entire composition is focused on the cutting up and burning of the prophecies of Jeremiah, the words spoken to him by the Lord that had been written, quote, on the roll of a book. The text caption for the moralization of this scene introduces the idea that cutting and burning the book was an act of heresy, quote, and so the heretic uses Holy Scripture as kindling to support his heresy, and the evil person is angered when he does not hear what pleases him. Of the various illustrations of the moralization in other copies of the Moralized Bible, the one in the English copy, at the end of the 13th century, is most interesting in characterizing, or should I say caricaturing, one of the heretics who misuses Holy Scripture by showing him with a squashed nose that often distinguishes the other or evildoers, as for example, in the detail on the far right. As a result of the burning of the sacred writing, in Jeremiah 36:28, the Lord commanded the prophet, and I quote now from the paraphrase in the Toledo Bible, to, quote, take again another volume and write in it all the previous words that were in the first volume that Joachim, king of Judah, burned. In other words, ordering an act of book salvage or restoration. In several copies of the Moralized Bible, as you see here, book destruction and book salvage and restoration are juxtaposed on the same page, striking instances of harmonious design layout and parallel composition that makes it all the more meaningful. This again is the Toledo Bible. The roundel in the right column shows Jeremiah carrying out the command of the Lord by instructing a tonsured cleric, a tonsured scribe, Baruch, as he raises his pen to a scroll on a writing stand. The details, according with the scriptural to the scriptural account, describing how the Lord's command was acted on. The saving of sacred words by writing them down again is the theme of the pictorial moralization here, where we see the Lord commanding Moses to rewrite the tables of the law that he had previously broken. I go on now to 1 Maccabees 1, another scriptural episode of the burning of the sacred books of the Israelites by godless rulers. The events recounted in 1 Maccabees took place during the reign of Antiochus IV, the 2nd century BCE Seleucid king, whose desecration of the temple in Jerusalem is the subject of illustrations in 4 of the copies of the Moralized Bible. The scriptural pictures are similar to each other in all the copies, and their accompanied text passages are identical. Here I'm showing the roundel in Vienna 1179, where Antiochus supervises the burning of the sacred books of the temple as the, quote, idol of desolation, quote, is placed on its altar. The two acts combined in a single image, just as they are in a single sentence in the Vulgate and in the Moralized Bible text. In the Middle Ages, Antiochus, who figured in several books of the Old Testament, was widely interpreted as Antichrist and represented in this way in other illustrations of the Moralized Bible. Here from 2 Maccabees 6 in the same Vienna manuscript, Antiochus orders the death of Eleazar the priest, and below this is interpreted as inspired by Antichrist to kill the apocalyptic witnesses Enoch and Elias. However, the episode of book burning by Antiochus in 1 Maccabees is moralized differently, in a pointedly contemporary fashion, as an example of devil-inspired favoritism of unworthy clerics, while honest and learned clerics suffer. In Vienna 1179, a bishop gives a crozier and a church model to a smaller cleric, clothed as in minor orders, and already on an episcopal throne. A devil is placing a mitre on the unworthy favorite's head. At the left, 2 clerics with a very large book emblem of their learning sit in sorrow and suffering, as their head to hand in hand gestures and bare feet indicate. The iconography changes in the Oxford Paris London Bible. There, one devil torments 2 Benedictines, while another presents an enlarged silver key to an enthroned Dominican. On one level, the key is a general symbol of a tool to unlock power, but of course, specifically, it's the emblem of the papacy and sometimes of bishops. The Pope, at the time of the production of the manuscript, Gregory IX, favored the Dominicans, and Dominican scholars were important figures in the University of Paris. As elsewhere, in the Oxford, Paris, London, and Toledo Bibles, it appears that the pictorial situation here expresses support of the old order and resentment of the new, particularly the Dominicans. The last scriptural episode of book burning is in the New Testament Acts of the Apostles, chapter 19. Here, it's a case of ridding the world of dangerous heretical books. The account concerns St. Paul's conversion of the Ephesians with arguments so powerful that they abandon their devotion to divination, the curious arts, and burn their books of pagan magic. The moralized Bible texts all paraphrase the Vulgate quite closely, and all the scriptural illustrations are also similar, showing Paul on the left preaching to a lay audience, and on the right, a group of devotees of the curious arts casting their books into a fire. These figures wear the pileus of scholars, and more specifically, the floppy caps of Jews, making the pictorial point that even the Jewish claimants of healing power, called exorcists in the Vulgate, could be converted. The captions for the pictorial moralizations of Oxford, Paris, London, and its successors explain that, quote, this means that when some learned men want to know more than is fitting to know, they fall into fantasies of their own. But, quote, those who do not think that they know always consider soberly how they may be worthy to serve Almighty God. Quote. The corresponding illustration shows on the right the learned clerics who are too curious, literally falling down as their books are cast into a structure that looks something like a trash can. While on the left, a Dominican and perhaps Franciscan together display a book, the Holy Scriptures. Interestingly, here, the pictorial moralization in the Bible of Jean Le Bon differs from those of the earlier Bibles, although the text passage, French as well as Latin, is similar. Now, the figures on the left, who prayerfully invoke the Lord by pointing up to heaven, gesture in derision at the seated group of those who, quote, want to know more than is fitting, poring over an open codex. No active book destruction is shown, and no visual translation of the metaphorical falling into fantasy. The pictorial message stresses that direct devotion to God is better than all of the learned study of books. I'd like to make some final comments about the 4 scriptural instances of book destruction illustrated in the Moralized Bible. In his groundbreaking essay of 1972, Sensus Literalis and Sensus Spiritualis in der Bibel Moralisée, Rainer Hausherr recognized a wide range of textual and pictorial interpretations that could be termed collectively the sensus spiritualis. He discussed numerous examples that were treated allegorically, or broadly speaking, typologically, eschatologically, or anagogically, or tropologically, that is, morally. These terms form a convenient scaffold for classifying the interpretation of the episodes of book destruction that I've surveyed today, either allegorical, as in Exodus 32, or moral in character, that is, combating heresy, as in Jeremiah 36, condemning clerical misbehavior, as in 1 Maccabees 1, or rejecting scholarly overinterpretation of sacred texts, as in Acts 19. Heresy, clerical misbehavior, and scholarly hubris were problems from the beginning of Christianity, yet they're highlighted with special brilliance in the Moralized Bible, as authors since Househair, Catherine Tackow, Christopher Hughes, Sarah Lipton, and Francois Bosflug, for instance, have shown us in individual studies. My case study of the treatment of biblical episodes of book burning reinforces the conclusion that expressing moral judgments about human conduct, whether clerical or secular, was a matter of great importance to the creators of the Moralized Bible, and that to the planners of the work, it was equally important for the royal recipients of these manuscripts to learn lessons about what worthy behavior could be for all sectors of society. Now, since John Loudon has clarified, if not completely solved, the problem of dating the volumes and identifying their original commissioners and recipients, I wonder whether his findings will help us now to develop a more comprehensive picture of the ways of thinking that produce these wonderful works, the expectations of their commissioners and recipients, and the mental and visual challenges and satisfactions that they offer. Following Loudon's making of the Bible Moralisée, who will dare to undertake a general study titled The Meanings of the Bible Moralisée? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sandler. Our next speaker describes herself and her website as your friendly neighborhood pink-haired book historian and curator of special collections at the Winterthur Library. And she is all of that, friendly and pink-haired, and the curator of special collections at the Winterthur Library since a few months ago. Allie Alvis, since receiving her 2 master's degrees, the first one in book history from the University of Edinburgh, and the second in information management at the University of Glasgow, just a short train ride down from Edinburgh. Allie has been actively expanding audiences for book history, not only through her active social media presence, but also through her many publications appearing in such venues as Heritage Science, the International Journal of the Book, the Smithsonian Library's Connect magazine, and an essay collection such as the recently published BH and DH, Book History and the Digital Humanities, in which she contributed the chapter Books of Hours, What Libraries Can Learn About Social Media Through Manuscripts. In addition to her position at the Winterthur Library, she also currently holds a Rare Books School Mellon Fellowship for Diversity, Inclusion, and Cultural Heritage. Today, she'll be speaking on pop bibliography, finding book history in popular media. Please join me in welcoming Allie Alvis.
All right, let's get the equipment set up here. Okay. Before I get started, I would just like to thank again Nick and Lynn for putting this together. Thank you all for being here for the very last session of a wonderful symposium. And I would like to dedicate this presentation to my friend, mentor, and dissertation supervisor, Joanna Green, who passed away in July. She really encouraged me to pursue such unique avenues of material culture inquiry such as this. And I know that she would have been super psyched about this symposium. So she's definitely here in spirit. All right. The 20th and 21st centuries can be characterized by the ubiquity of creative media. From the earliest blockbuster silent films to juggernaut modern franchises, from board games to AAA video games, from weekly webcomics to webtoons, modern life is permeated by highly visual fiction, which people consume both actively and passively. Being a fan of a certain TV show or game is a powerful group marker, with these fandoms expanding from the early days of mailing material back and forth to online spaces, which facilitate group discourse at breakneck speeds. While these fandoms frequently exhibit growth that resembles organic grassroots organizing, they are not purely fields of wildflowers. This is agriculture, with companies planting the seeds for these fan communities in order to generate a profit. But this type of propagation is not done only through creating lovable characters and plot twists that leave viewers on the edges of their seats. It is also done by crafting settings that resonate with particular groups. Jessica Pressman analyzes this phenomenon as applied to books in her 2020 work Bookishness, which examines the establishment of an identity derived from a physical nearness to books. She discusses how Big B books as a marketing and popular media concept offer intimacy as a refuge from digital capitalism and cultivate a fetishistic nostalgia for, quote, a time when books smelled. But why these books? For a general population that has more often than not never physically interacted with a book printed or created before the 20th century, why do they look at a book on screen or in a video game and say, ah, the presence of this old book tells me that this is a medieval setting, or the person using this old book must be a wizard, or this old book with strange designs must be a valuable tool for the scholar character. Frequently, these old books present as what people in the field of rare books and manuscripts recognize as strange chimeras of physical attributes from different periods, cultures, and uses. However, certain repetitions of anachronistic form emerge when looking at, say, magical tomes across various media properties. The creators of these chimera books are clearly consciously and subconsciously referencing each other's work and aesthetic vocabulary. But where did this vocabulary originate, and what can it tell us about the popular understanding of the book as an object? These are the questions that the concept of pop bibliography aims to address. Pop bibliography draws from the ideas of both pop art and Megan L. Cook's dirtbag medievalism. In 1957, Richard Hamilton described pop art as popular, transient, expendable, low-cost, mass-produced, young, witty, sexy, gimmicky, glamorous, and big business. Similarly, Cook boils down her dirtbag medievalism, which addresses the earnest, bombastic, kind of meta-medievalism distilled through the internet and pop culture, one might see in medieval times restaurant or in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, to 10 key features. It is commercial and wants to be noticed. It is a creature of mass media and will find you. It is accessible. It gestures towards historical accuracy, but is not too worried about it. It is often more about the present telling on itself than the past. It does not aspire to cultural authority. It is ideologically porous. It is effectively earnest, but not primarily educational, and can be a matter of intention or reception, but is more often the latter. Both of these concepts address the marketing utility of various media, as well as the idea that profit and appeal tend to be prioritized over concerns of accuracy. Umberto Eco's statement that we are still living under the banner of medieval technology is true of both the real world and the worlds of fiction, even if that banner requires a few modifications in a fictional setting. The Middle Ages have never been reconstructed from scratch. The early medieval rise of the codex format, thanks to the expansion of Christianity, has had a far-reaching effect on the way Western culture conceptualizes both knowledge and the sacred, which is sometimes quite literally interpreted in media. Books being used as visual shorthand for knowledge is not a new concept, as we have seen with Bazira and many of the other presentations today. Strolling through any portrait gallery will yield a host of historical examples of upper-class people explicitly using books and libraries as props to communicate the image of an intellectual. Books are more than repositories of text. They are icons of knowledge, notes Jessica Pressman. And Brian Cummings, in his discussion of the book as a symbol, observes that more than other objects, old books are felt to embody not only a physical memory, but also a record of past thoughts, of transforming what appears to be purely immaterial and conceptual into something with concrete form. But considering the general populace's unfamiliarity with old books, media properties that feature such objects are using them as symbols of symbols. They are deep in skeuomorph territory, with their physical attributes serving no purpose other than to evoke pastness. Cornelius Holtorf describes the primary attribute of pastness as exhibiting a particular appearance corresponding to the past in your imagination. Exploring the concepts of created environments such as Disney theme parks, he notes that the level of attention Disney designers give to material clues and other details ensures that guests in the theme park do not admire the verisimilitude of what is ultimately complete artifice, but that they are made to put the very distinction between real and fake behind them. He quotes one of the designers of Main Street USA in Disneyland Paris. "We're not trying to design what really existed in 1900. We're trying to design what people think they remember about what existed." This concept of pastness is the most important attribute of pop bibliography. Books and manuscripts in fiction don't need to be accurate to get their point across. They just need to look like how you think you remember them looking. And when the only way most viewers have meaningfully interacted with medieval or early modern books is through fiction, creators are no longer making up objects that reference objects from the real world. They're referencing a reference to a reference. The recursion is the point. An object is most credible when it corresponds to people's preconceptions and looks as they might imagine it might, thus confirming what they already know. So what are the calling cards of pop bibliography? It is commercial. Just like dirtbag medievalism, pop bibliography's primary function is marketability. Books and media look cool and interesting because somebody wants them to look cool and interesting in order to appeal to a variety of audiences. And the tastes of audiences are prone to change. This can be seen by tracking the visual development of books as featured in long-lived franchises such as Magic the Gathering. You can see a card from 1993 on the left and a card from 2023 on the right. Players now expect a certain level of complexity in Magic's card illustrations, and by extension, the books that pop up in them. The art directors are more than happy to oblige. Pop bibliography plays very well with Pressman's bookishness to cultivate not just an identity as a reader, but a reader that values the past. Pop bibliography is usually not the center of attention. It can be seen in the background of films in which books are never addressed or discussed. It can be seen as the constant tool of the video game mage, or as the key MacGuffin that will resolve a fantastic plot. It can even be observed in books humanized to varying degrees who act as supporting characters. But pop bibliography is almost never the main character. I am purposely adding this almost never caveat here. I welcome any media examples where old books are the protagonists, outside Swift's Battle of the Books. And even here, the books are so humanized that they kind of lose their codicological attributes. This is by design. Bookishness in the Pressman sense is particularly effective when the audience has an avatar through which they can envision themselves in a fantastic environment, and that they can identify with in the real world. The number of researchers and heritage professionals who have posted this gif of a harried Gandalf rifling through old books with the caption, "Me today in the reading room," is very far from zero. Pop bibliography is diffused. It is a dream of a dream. Eco describes a variety of ways of dreaming of the medieval period, outlining 10 Little Middle Ages. His definition of dream in this formative piece aligns more closely with an interest, or a striving for, or a hope. The dream inherent to pop bibliography instead denotes an unconscious state where the wanderings of one's mind fade in and out of comprehension, concrete shapes and ideas flowing around and through each other with no concern for boundaries, conceptual, physical, or temporal. Pop bibliography is the image of what you think you remember about books. It is a blend. This diffusion and blurring of borders generates a sort of book stew for designers to dip into. The stew is full of chopped up, decontextualized physical attributes in different amounts. For example, a spoonful will frequently contain a leather binding, conspicuous wear and tear, and calligraphic contents. But sometimes you wind up with illumination from Arabic tradition or a 19th century pictorial cloth binding. The ending credits of the 2023 Dungeons and Dragons film is a spectacular example of this blending. The main ingredient, as you can see here, is a gradient of Western late medieval illumination into Persian illumination. It hops from the manuscript to print in the visible bite of the figure combined with a bestiary-inspired illumination. You can kind of see in this, the shading of this outline implies that it is an impression, such as a woodcut. And then to the late 19th century in this form of style of movable book. And a second example. Though the 1994 movie The Pagemaster is very bookish in the Pressman sense, it does not dabble much in pop bibliography. However, its title sequence, composed of aesthetic nods to manuscripts and early printing, is. Pop bibliography is fetishistic. It exploits the remoteness of the general public from real old books to create desire. But this idea did not spring from the void. It is rooted in an older cultural concept. The historic unattainability of books contributes to persistent ideas of their mystique. The sense that certain kinds of books are perpetually out of reach is a remnant of the pre-mid-19th century period when the vast majority of books were far outside the price range of the common person. The role that highly embellished books have traditionally played in religious contexts also lends them a sense of sacred untouchability. This mentality is perpetuated in the 21st century by misconceptions about the accessibility of special collections libraries and the high prices of many medieval books on the market. At the same time, books as a commodity are so ubiquitous today that their form and function are generally taken for granted. But the medieval manuscripts, early modern herbals, and massive religious works sporting bars and chains that inspire the depiction of books in fictional properties are no less real than the books on your average shelf. This recent hand-wringing tweet from Marcia's library in Ireland is an anecdote of how the fetish aspect of pop bibliography manifests in the general public, though the despairing tone shows a marked mishandling of an opportunity to engage on the visitor's level. For anybody who can't quite see this, it says, quote, "Are the books real? This question is coming up more and more often on tours of Marcia's library. Actual physical in-person tours when people are 2 feet away from the books. It's as if some people are so used to living online that they can't quite understand physical reality." I will address this more fully later. Pop bibliography strays into the real world. Circling back to its commercial nature, pop bibliography is a prime candidate for merchandising. These embellished blank books are for sale in a shop in Disney World, and they are replicas of pseudo-medieval storybooks that feature in the opening sequences of Disney's Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. I personally own this plastic book safe that is a replica of a key item from the Cardcaptor Sakura anime. However, Paper Blank's journals, which are notebook reproductions of extant rare books and manuscripts, are not pop bibliography. Which leads me to the final attribute. It is not real, but it doesn't mind if it's taken as such. Facsimiles are not pop bibliography. In order to fit the pop bibliography mold, someone has to have gotten kind of weird with it. Properties such as the ascendance of a bookworm anime, in which the development of the codex form and movable type printing in a fantasy setting are a key plot point, dance this line. While most people wouldn't look at a wizardly tome in Dr. Strange's library, such as the one here, and say, this is a historical object that actually exists in the real world, they very easily could get that sense from Jennifer Lopez receiving a, quote, first edition of the Iliad. Yeah. From the male love interest in the 2015 film, The Boy Next Door. The male love interest claims he got it for $1 at a garage sale. Even though this is an actual 1884 Chicago edition of the Iliad as translated by Alexander Pope, it has become pop bibliography through context. Real is a difficult word to pin down sometimes. Establishing the idea of pop bibliography is not an effort to scold non-specialists for depicting books incorrectly. This is not a prescriptive concept. Rather, it is descriptive. Acknowledging the presence of pop bibliography content allows us to get a sense of how people outside the field conceptualize the past, and of how they understand book history in general. We can get an idea of how pop bibliography manifests through using the trading card game Magic: The Gathering as a case study. Magic has a sometimes subtle, sometimes explicit relationship with books in their physical forms. From the design of the library card backs, which you can see on the left there to resemble book covers, to the in-game terminology for a deck, a player's library. Codices with physical aspects associated with old books serve as visual shorthand to create a particular environment and atmosphere when they appear in card art, and also contribute to the construction of a sort of manufactured cultural nostalgia that is meant to immerse a player. Magic boasts over 40 million players, over 22,000 unique illustrated cards, and an ever-expanding collection of lore that adds dimension to gameplay. With limited space on each card for storytelling, efficiency of communication is everything. Card art does the narrative heavy lifting, adding context and flavor to game mechanics and creating a space for players to see themselves. The many worlds of Magic are situated in the broad category of fantasy, which owes huge aesthetic debts to the Western medieval period and ambiguous concepts of academia. The artists and designers use a number of visual cues to establish this setting and feel, including the presence or absence of books. The basic concept of the gameplay of Magic is that players are planeswalkers, magical beings that can move between different planes of reality, and they are engaging in a wizardly duel by casting spells and summoning creatures, as represented by cards. The cards also contain units of the magical energy needed to power their wizardry in the form of 5 colors of mana, represented by a card type called land. All Magic cards display the same layout. Card name at the top, followed by an image, then the card's type, and finally the card's text, which describes how the card is used and its effects. Sometimes there will also be italicized flavor text, providing storyline context or anecdotes that are not strictly necessary for gameplay. To win, a player must get their opponent's life total to 0 by attacking them with creatures and spells. Within Magic, the setting, lore, and plot are generally called flavor by the game's designers, hence flavor text. Having a good metaphor eases gameplay, head designer Mark Rosewater said in a 2003 article. If players can apply outside knowledge to implicitly understand game rules, the game's complexity goes down. The flavor text is the only in-game explanation for how the events, objects, and figures depicted in the card art interact with each other in the overarching narrative of each new set of Magic cards, which are released quarterly. Rosewater freely admits that the trading card game format is not the easiest place to tell a story, and this mindset has allowed Wizards of the Coast to focus more on cultivating a game environment with the cards than a full narrative. Books are one tool used to create this game environment in both a meta and literal sense. As I mentioned, in Magic terminology, a player's deck of cards is called a library. The idea is that all of the creatures a player can summon and spells they can cast are contained in a magical tome, as Rosewater calls it. Another method of winning the game is by making your opponent draw all of their cards, thus depleting their library and making them unable to take any more magical knowledge from it. This concept is reflected in the design for the backs of the cards, which loosely resemble an 18th century mottled calf binding with a central panel. The book form was further reinforced in the packaging of early starter decks and sets, whose boxes featured page edges and even a bookmark. The bibliographic motif has also been reflected in in-store display materials, such as this original booster pack display box for the 1997 Weatherlight set. Many books that appear in Magic card art feature physical attributes that read as medieval or otherwise of the past. Chained books are a common sight, with the chains used not only in the traditional sense of being a type of anti-theft device, but also in quite whimsical ways to keep buoyant books from floating away, or to be used to create a menacing atmosphere. Metal furniture is another binding attribute that is common throughout the planes of magic, taking various familiar and unfamiliar forms. A particularly flexible motif is the central roundel on the front board. While it is sometimes a metal boss, the roundel most often takes the form of a gemstone, similar to the ones on this treasure binding from the Walters Museum, and later in the bindings of Sangorski and Sutcliffe. The contents of books are less often showcased in card art, but also reveal strong Western medieval and early modern manuscript inspiration. The pages are usually yellow-hued, either to imply aged paper or that they're parchment. There is almost always a focus on the book's illustrations and general layout, rather than an effort to convey textual information in the card art. This is for logistical reasons. The small size of the art as it's printed on the cards makes it very difficult for text to be reproduced clearly. And Magic's massive international distribution means that text incorporated into the art would be challenging to adapt for localization. From Magic's inception, game designers and artists use the fetish status of old books to enhance the setting and draw players in. Richard Garfield, who created the game here at Penn in the mathematics department, noted that he specifically wanted a player's deck to be called a library to impose a layer of ambiance on the very act of drawing cards from it. In order to get a sense of where this ambiance originates from, I have interviewed several artists about where they drew their inspiration for the fantastic books they included in their art. Some, such as Randy Gallegos, artist of Tome of the Guild Pact, described that they looked closely at individual physical books to get a sense of certain aspects of their forms, in this case, the damage to the spine. But many, including Howard Lyon, who illustrated Enlightened Tutor, and Dan Scott, who illustrated Cogwork Librarian, have said that they, quote, didn't think about the books too much. Or noted, quote, old leather-bound books as a broad category of inspiration. Still others, such as Kieran Yanner, who is the artist of Vessel of Malignity here on the right, these card names are so great, expressed that he, Ouroboros-like, was inspired by extant fantasy books, such as the Necronomicon from Evil Dead, or books as illustrated in Dungeons and Dragons manuals. Conversations with these and other artists who work for Wizards of the Coast on Magic cards reveal key details about their reference to actual extant old books. A pattern that emerged is that artists couldn't pinpoint their inspiration for certain physical attributes of the old books they painted. They arose from a nebulous general concept of how old books should look, which was primarily drawn from other media representations rather than first-hand encounters with the books themselves. Generally, the artists tend to use Google Images as a starting point, which is not surprising. Different library catalogs and digital repositories can be difficult to navigate even for rare book professionals. And I will say that this Google result came before AI image generators really got off the ground. If you Google ancient tome now, you get very different results, which I will come back to. Common search keywords for the artists include ancient tome, which turns up this fascinating array of material. This is the kind of self-perpetuation inherent to pop bibliography. I think there is only one real old book in this first page of search results, the one on the second row on the right. And even then, there's no identifying information there. It's from Reddit. So there's a divorcing of context happening here. Heather Hudson, who illustrated the card Geth's Grimoire on the right in 2003, recalls that she created that particular piece in a time before the internet in her professional life. Instead, she used an old Webster's dictionary as the primary visual reference for this girthy volume, which features nods to the practice of anthropodermic bibliopegy, finding a book in human skin. Randy Gallegos, who we saw earlier, who illustrated Tome of the Guild Pact, which appeared in 2019, noted that specifically for the wear to the book's spine, he used, quote, a book he has at home, a Spanish language history of Ecuador that is an old family-owned book of his wife's. Folio of Fancies from the 2019 Throne of Eldraine set is a prime example of pop bibliography in action. In my interview with the artist Colin Boyer, he noted that one of the only strict requirements the art directors had for him was the inclusion of this keyhole motif. You can see this keyhole repeated on the robes of the wizard Gadwick on another card from the Throne of Eldraine set, Gadwick the Wizened. Folio of Fancies and Gadwick the Wizened are kind of partner cards aesthetically and functionally. In Gadwick's art, we see that Gadwick is pondering our folio front and center, while its winged friends flit about in the background. The keyhole motif shared by these cards is a clue that Gadwick and folio play well together mechanically. Boyer cited two broadly defined pieces as aesthetic sources for the page decorations of folio: an unspecified illuminated manuscript and a work by, this is a quote, it took me a long time to sort of unpuzzle this, Leonardo on the fall off of light on cast shadows. That it took me a long time to uncover the source of this Leonardo illustration, so I'm very proud of this. The illuminated serpent that appears on the left page is clearly inspired by a medieval bestiary, likely the 12th century Aberdeen bestiary, given the extent to which that digitization has been popularized and shared. Meanwhile, the Da Vinci illustration comes directly from his Paris manuscript C, which was executed in the late 1480s. Brief aside, Boyer actually found a Getty Images version of Leonardo's Paris manuscript C, which did not identify it as such. I had to trace it back from where Getty Images got it, and then trace it to Wikipedia, which was a public open source image, and then actually identify it. So this is the level of decontextualization these images go through regularly. Boyer's art presents these two works that are nearly 400 years apart in history and quite distant geographically as part of one book, presumably as executed by Gadwick or some other individual in fiction. Many magic cards depict the vibe of what medieval books should look like as a delightful mishmash of medieval and early modern characteristic, passed through the lens of extant fantasy aesthetic vocabulary. It gives us a fascinating glimpse of how the artists and designers of Magic the Gathering conceptualize and leverage the idea of old books. The historicization helps to construct a mythos for players to inhabit, and has thus translated to commercial success. Mark Rosewater notes that the Strixhaven set, which specifically foregrounds bookishness through its setting at a magical university, is the best-selling premier set of all time. The people at the helm of Magic cultivate a sense of nostalgia and identity specifically through the inclusion of books in their settings to evoke a sense of a fictional past, while reinforcing the idea that books are a thing of the past by putting them in a wider neo-medieval context and rarely featuring them when the franchise dabbles in science fiction. Properties such as Magic are where dirtbag medievalism and pop bibliography beautifully intersect, with each concept amplifying the other. Professionally, I have used an understanding of pop bibliography to aid in my efforts of outreach and education. Acknowledging the baseline old book experience of the general public is an invaluable tool to meet them where they are. For example, their recognition of fictional chimera book physical attributes in real-world objects is a great jumping-off point for more in-depth discussion. Even misunderstandings arising from pop bibliography are important. When someone assumes that all old books are handwritten because the word manuscript is applied willy-nilly in pop culture, or that you should be wearing gloves when handling rare material because of what you've seen in movies, they are telling you about themselves. The tweet I mentioned before, the pearl clutching over a visitor who wanted to know if the old books on the shelves were real, would have been an ideal opportunity to engage with that visitor using pop bibliography as a foundation. It gives specialists an educational jumping-off point. Pop bibliography also offers an occasion for introspection as a book historical profession. In our love affair with digitization, have we really done enough to let everyone know that these resources exist? Have we talked about them in a way that implies or explicitly states that these digital objects are not just for academic researchers, but for artists and makers to use as inspiration? And what books exactly are we making available this way? While I, a veteran of navigating digital collections, could pull up a digitized book bound in pigskin with metal bosses in about 2 minutes flat, I'm not sure where to start if I wanted to view digitized examples of Japanese, Chinese, and Korean book structures, or Arabic illuminated manuscripts. This Western focus is especially telling for the artist, designer, or author who is uncomfortable looking for information beyond Google. In a somewhat recent twist, so-called AI image generators have added their spin to the concept of pop bibliography. I will add here that this is not the same flavor of AI that was spoken about earlier. This is generative based on an enormous and mostly unidentified and uncredited corpus. Glorified art plagiarism machines, these image generators macerate swathes of data and produce visuals that are usually at the far edge of the uncanny valley and are frequently downright creepy. In March of this year, Suzette Van Haren asked the Midjourney image generator to produce, quote, medieval manuscript page, 15th century, Book of Hours, Dutch, photo from above. And this popped out. On November 14th, just this Tuesday, I enlisted colleagues to prompt DALL-E 3 and Midjourney to produce an old book, a magical tome, and an illuminated manuscript. These are what came out of DALL-E 3. Is this pop bibliography? It is certainly commercial, diffused, a blend, fetishistic, straying into the real world, and is sure not real. It's flattening centuries of bibliography into one visually interesting form. These are the results from Midjourney. But it's also not human. The reason pop bibliography is a useful lens is that it gives us a glimpse of the human mind, highlighting the sticky aspects of the physical forms of books that resonate through the centuries. Observing this pop culture game of old book telephone wouldn't be a useful exercise if every call along the chain were randomly generated. It might give us a sense of commonly occurring forms and traits, which is interesting and useful, but is not the same point of inquiry. Aside from the material culture and philosophical questions of what it means to generate an image of a digitized manuscript that does not exist, I agree with Dot Porter's sentiment. Manuscripts and old books are interesting because of the humanity behind and in them, and AI muddles or destroys that context. This is a topic I will be working through more fully at a later date using pop bibliography as a framework, so watch this space. Recognizing the influence pop bibliography has on how people understand rare books and manuscripts allows practitioners in book historical fields to connect and reflect. It tells on us as much as it does the general zeitgeist. There is inherently a large element of autoethnography when confronting it, looking back on our own experiences with chimera books on screens or on pages before you'd ever set foot in a reading room. I hope that taking the significance of pop bibliography into account will present new opportunities for inquiry in the material culture of the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, can I invite our speakers to come up to the keynote?
Lynn, do you want to call on people?
And I see a question, Lisa Fagan-Davis.
Lisa Bacon-Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Allie, I'm so excited about this for so many reasons. I've been really interested in manuscripts and rare books in popular culture for a really long time. So I'm glad to have a word to apply to this. And I'm going to throw a few more examples out. The restricted section in Harry Potter
Yes.
is a really great example of this. And also, of course, to refer back to our friend Dot, the Jedi manuscripts, the ancient Jedi manuscripts.
I had a screenshot of a tweet that compared the long room to the Jedi library.
There we go.
It is a one-to-one comparison, but I cut it at the last second. So well received.
Okay. The Friar's manuscript in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Indiana Jones takes one look at it and said, yes, 12th century. Not 12th century. If you all took one look at it, you would say, oh no, that's very, very late 15th, if not early 16th century. And then finally, of course, the Voynich manuscript, which is a particular favorite of mine, is how the Voynich appears in popular culture, in novels, in movies, in video games, and tabletop games also. This is what brings a lot of my students in library school. It's what gets them to library school and what gets them into my class is this kind of exposure to rare books and manuscripts. It's so incredibly important. So thank you.
There's question. I think there are a couple questions in the room.
Thank you for two marvelous papers. Allie, can I explore a bit the pop bibliography and AI Dutch Book of Hours?
Absolutely.
Can you go back to that on the
It's back
slide?
2 slides, that one. Yeah.
I mean,
gives you the heebie-jeebies.
I mean, it is totally fantastic. I mean, because what it reminds you of is when you ask AI something and it comes back with information, and it's this black box and you don't know where it's pulling it from. I mean, lots of people can sort of imagine where this stuff is being pulled from by some algorithm, but it's absolutely not Dutch. I mean, it's nearly everything else. And I'm really interested in the text. I mean, how did they get that text to look like that? Because it's not, never mind Raphael not being able to write. Right.
I wonder.
Oh shit, and they're on.
Yeah.
Well, and the lesson there is to put them on Flickr, by the way.
Yeah. I know, it really makes you wonder what kind of metadata the AI is sort of ingesting as part of its crawling of all of these visual resources. Like, is it finding things called Dutch, or is it just finding illuminations and sort of saying like, yeah, sure, that's something. Let's go with that.
I didn't know much about books of hours at the time when I did the metadata for the Walters manuscript, so maybe it's my metadata.
Thank you for both of those wonderful papers. Really, I'm totally geeking out. This question is for Lucy, and it's just a small kind of what struck me really. I was thinking about it. I'm not sure which Bible Moralise it was, but that there was a beautiful juxtaposition between Synagoga as a woman and her like broken kind of contrapposto, and then the burning of the scrolls. And I wonder if you could speak about this kind of repetition or connection there, or if there is one, or if you've looked at it in that way.
Well, I the reason I showed the physical images of the female personification of synagogue, I looked for those that had a broken lance, or And it just struck me that the construction of the, I don't know how I would describe scroll at the bottom was so sharply angular, it was like a broken lance.
Hmm.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much for this fascinating paper. I just have some short kind of question and comment for Allie, because I was recall a lot of things, and so one of them is just from my experience as a reader that I watch a lot of like Japanese manga and anime. So this comes to be actually more like a Japanese reception of like they use a lot of those Western materials, especially in something called isekai, just like parallel world, that sort of thing. So it will usually look like a stereotypical medieval European, but on the Japanese eyes. And then from my understanding for that, I think like there will be some relevant concept called bibliomancy and literomancy that involves like, so like those books have some sort of sacred meaning. Like actually this happens in the medieval West. Like we used to have they used to have the tradition that you get a book of Aeneas, and then you open one page and read those lines, and that would be a prediction of like your day. But I guess that Japanese doesn't know about that.
Mhm.
So what they do is that they have their own way of those like Western medieval way. And also another interesting thing is that if the Japanese manga or anime would have some sort of like traditional Japanese thing, like they use their own way of books, but there's a huge difference. Like for example, those East Asian tradition, we think there will be some sacred book, but they sometimes, mostly they look broken. They look like a lot of wrinkles, and it just looks a lot of dust. And that will be some sort of like sacred tantric Buddhist teaching, or it is about the martial art. So I would also vaguely guess that they might show some sort of like very different book tradition, at least from this. I mean, from the East Asian and the Western. Yeah. So
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen The Ascendance of a Bookworm anime, but the sort of plot progression is it's an isekai. A girl dies and is reincarnated in this fantasy world. This girl was a librarian, and in this world, there are no books. So her sort of quest is to reinvent the modern book as it exists in the 21st century. And so the story is that she is going through all of these trials and tribulations, trying to redevelop paper making and redevelop ink making and redevelop binding, woodcut illustrations. It's fascinating. And then there's all this fantasy nonsense that's going on as well. But I'm in it for the books. But the sort of progression of skills that she picks up is very sort of evolutionarily oriented to, it kind of starts at the Eastern book form and progresses to the Western book form. Like they are trying consciously to move to Western codicological formats, structures, materials. The Asian book format is sort of depicted as a starting point on the way to this other more sophisticated art, which is bizarre. And it's so fascinating, and papers could be written about that.
So this may be a little overly artificial to get you both to reflect on this question, but I'll start with Lucy. Allie's paper made me think about the potential for these successive copies of the Bible Moralisée riffing on and recycling and almost caricaturing the earlier representations of books in the earliest Bible Moralisée. Maybe, and I'd like to ask you about whether that's happening. And then perhaps maybe Allie, could you consider a case in which you would see medieval pop bibliography happening in medieval manuscripts themselves? So if Lucy, is that what's going on with the successive copies?
Well, I was struck when I was working on this that of the sequential and some of the pictures of book destruction could be, or one case study. I think I would like to apply this to other illustrations of the Moralized Bibles, because I think that the succession, I won't say progression, but the changes from one copy to the next are extremely interesting in revealing changes in social changes. So you could, and especially I just was fascinated by the changes that took place with the mid 14th century Bible. And I don't know if I don't know whether in the literature anyone has juxtaposed the 13th century copies with the mid 14th century one. And I recently I had an email exchange with Catherine Takow, who thought that who had been told by somebody, oh, Lucy is working on a book on moralized Bibles. I said, no, because it turns out that Catherine Takow is in the process of completing a book on, essentially, one could use a shorthand term, the meanings of the moralized Bibles, but she's not going beyond the first 13th century copies. And I would like to see us deal with a larger time span. I don't know what they would do with in pop bibliography,
Yeah.
the moralized Bible.
No, it is interesting, especially some of the papers that were given earlier today and yesterday, for example, about the shapes of the tablets having rounded tops, or Christian illuminators trying to figure out what the heck a Torah scroll looked like. That pop bibliography is characterized by its removal by 2 steps from the original thing. And so when you have artists who are obviously somewhat familiar with book forms because they're illustrating books, they've probably seen their finished results, at least in the earlier days when, you know, everything was done in one house. But, you know, the fact that they probably have never seen a Torah scroll in person, that is very pop bibliography. That is nearing that. Yeah.
So I think we'll end there with questions. Thank you very much to both of our speakers. And before we release you to the bar and the reception table, I want to hand it over to my wonderful colleague, Nick, to say a few last words.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone. I will be brief. I promise. I, originally planned to sort of give one of those end of conference summaries and try to kind of pick out the key themes and all of that. But I was just so wrapped by all these presentations and talks, and by this 2.5 days, that I didn't really get around to it. So I do want to say a number of things, but I do want to say that we are planning to produce some kind of proceedings of these last 2.5 days. And I know this is news probably for the speakers, and of course we will provide you with more details as we get them about this sort of project, because we really feel that this topic has legs and that there's a great deal of interest. And so that's one thing. The other thing, of course, there are a huge number of thank yous in order, not least of which to Lynn, who has been an amazing partner here for this symposium, but for all of the symposia, all 16 of them. And again, we couldn't have done any of this without her. But also my colleagues from the Schoenberg Institute and from Kislak, particularly our wonderful chairs. I want to thank as well. So Mitch Frass, Amy Hutchins, Zofia Zawenska, Cosette Bruns Alonso, and am I forgetting anyone? And Sean, our director, of course, and Dot for the questions as well, for handling the questions. So thank you all. Thank you. And as you know, this is a sort of signal, a couple of days for the Schoenberg Institute, our 10th anniversary, and we were so pleased to be able to honor our co-founder Barbara Brisdell Schoenberg last night. And again, none of this would have been possible without her and of course without Larry. And I want to thank also our tech team, our wonderful tech team, Matt and Betsy. They've done an amazing job. All of our speakers, and particularly, I think Sabina with the VR headset, that's an added level of complexity. So imagine giving a paper and then having to describe this complex technology to a bunch of novices. So thank you. And also to Mindel Dubansky for bringing these wonderful objects to us all the way from New York. So thank you very much. These are sort of extras. Of course, all the speakers deserve our praise, but giving a paper and also dealing with logistics deserves that extra little bit of praise. So thank you. And I think finally, this conference in particular, this symposium wouldn't have been possible without the Basira Project, and the Basira Project wouldn't have been possible without Barbara Williams Ellertson, who I first met actually 5 years ago at the 2018 Schoenberg Symposium. So it shows you how these events kind of build to yet more adventures and yet more intellectual discovery. And we're so thrilled with how all of you have reacted to Basira. We have a lot of work left to do, and we're so thankful to all of you. I know Barbara and I are really thrilled with the reception so far, and we ask for all of you to continue helping us, giving us suggestions, and volunteering to be on our project team. We could use all of your help. So I think that's everything. Thank you so much, and we'll announce the theme for next year shortly. So stay tuned.